guess who announced she has COVID? Son of a gun. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, has tested positive for the coronavirus. And here's her statement. While I have not had close contact in person with the president or senior members of the White House staff since Wednesday, I am disclosing today's positive test out of abundance of transparency. I last saw the president on Tuesday when we sat outside more than 6 feet apart and wore masks. Well, that's interesting because she's double vaxxed and she's very proud of it. And but this is what she said earlier.
The data is very clear. As Dr. Walensky said on an earlier briefing today, this is really becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And that means getting vaccinated, you can save yourself. Okay, so that's a big pharma talking point you just heard from a professional liar, which is the president's press secretary, which everyone knows is there to lie to you. That's what the press secretary does. Everybody pretended that it was only Trump's press secretaries that were liars, but that's the job. And so she just lied and said it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And whoopsie daisy, guess who just got COVID? Miss Double Vaccinated herself. And as the science shows, vaccinated people can get the virus and spread the virus just as much as unvaccinated people. That's the conclusion of a year-long study, that you are just as likely to spread the virus. You have just as big a viral load as an unvaccinated person when you are infected with the virus. And guess what? The shot doesn't protect you from being infected with the virus. That's over. They are no longer saying that. Here's Jen Psaki trying to explain to everybody the confusing recommendations around the boosters. Now, you remember the booster shots were being pushed hard by her and her boss, and the Biden administration were pushing for the FDA to approve the booster. In fact, they announced a boosters program was going to be rolled out before the FDA had approved it. And so the head of the vaccine department at the FDA resigned in protest. Did they talk about that? Imagine if the head of the vaccine department resigned under Trump. That would be 24/7 on the news. You barely even know about it. I bet you don't even know about it. And so now the person who was the problem is out of the way. And now we got another probably big pharma dupe in their place. So nobody's pushing back anymore there. They got rid of the person who's pushing back. And so they were giving all different kinds of advice about the boosters because the FDA wasn't on board and the Biden administration was bullshitting you. And now listen to her. By the way, she's going to try to explain it, and she gets it wrong.
A concern that after all the back and forth on the advice and guidance from the government, people are confused about the booster and maybe even more doubtful about it.
So he just said all the back and forth on the advice about the booster, people are just confused, and now they're doubtful. And so the advice on the boosters is if you are vulnerable, you should take the booster. But if you're not, and you're young and healthy, you should not take a booster. That's the recommendation right now. Listen to what she says.
Well, I would say the reason we did this chart is because sometimes it's self-perpetuating. If everybody here is saying it's confusing, then people are going to think it's confusing. And so what I'm trying to do is alleviate the confusion, right? And explain these are exactly the categories. Anyone who's had a Pfizer shot 6 months ago, go get another shot. If you took Moderna or J&J, they're still considering that data. Don't get the shot yet, not approved yet. So we want to do everything we can to alleviate any confusion, answer questions people have. President went and got his shot, his booster shot on camera to make clear it's safe, it's effective, it's something you should do if you're in one of these categories.
So you only are supposed to get it if you're vulnerable. She said, if you had that boost, just go ahead and get it. That's not right. Anyway, singer John Bon Jovi cancels a concert after testing positive for COVID. He is fully vaccinated. So I just want to make, and this is the part that no one will admit. People are still pretending that if I wear enough masks and I get enough boosters, that I won't get COVID. You're gonna fucking get it. And you know how I know this? This is Biden's director of COVID response saying, given Delta's contagiousness and the fitness of future mutations in order to beat it, this means SARS-CoV-2 will be contagious enough that everyone will get the virus. So if you're still operating under the idea that people have to get vaccinated so we can stop the spread, you're wrong. Because the highest vaccinated countries and counties have the highest rates of transmission. So you're wrong, just wrong on the science. And you're wrong that you think that you can keep yourself from getting it. You're not. Everyone, if you live long enough, is going to get the goddamn virus. That's what Jen Psaki proves. That's what John Bon Jovi proves. Psaki's infection is consistent with what Biden's director of COVID response asserted. Everyone is going to get COVID at some point. No matter how many people get vaccinated, it's not going away. Of course, vaccination protects you from serious illness and hospitalization and no one else. There's the BBC. COVID, double vaccinated, still spread the virus at home. Individuals who have had 2 vaccine doses can be just as infectious as those who have not been jabbed. So let me bring in Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. What do you have? What's your response to Jen Psaki, who's double vaccinated and who declared this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated who is now sick with COVID? What do you say to that, Max?
What she said was based on a phony CDC study, and we see so many bogus CDC studies coming out. They're basically propaganda masquerading as data. And that study measured the population from a period in late 2020 and early 2021 before most of the population had taken vaccinations against COVID-19. And it concluded that 99% of deaths were in the unvaccinated because hardly anyone, very few people had had a vaccine. So they're juking the stats as they always had been. And then it went out to NPR and other national propaganda radio and other publications, and they produced articles like CDC finds that there's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. 99% of the people who die are unvaccinated. And then the Biden administration demagogues it and begins to say that the unvaccinated want the freedom to kill people.
Yes.
That is almost an exact quote by Joe Biden in his last town hall. He said, what I'm mad about is that people want freedom. They want the freedom to kill other people by not taking the vaccine, which is unscientific, but it's also a demagogic statement, the kind of thing that Trump would get wrapped for. And where does it lead to? Well, on October 24th in Inland Empire, east of LA in Palmdale, a bunch of employees staged a protest against vaccine mandates. And a man named William Aslaxon rammed his truck into these people, injuring one woman, it was a Jeep Wrangler, and he just plowed through the crowd because he believed that they were killing people. And many of them, who knows, that they could have been vaccinated and showing solidarity with their fellow employees. But anyway, he attempted to kill them all. He was caught 90 minutes later. It was a hit and run. And he's charged with felony assault. And you don't hear much about this. I mean, if this had been, a neo-Nazi going after, or white nationalist going after racial justice protesters, we'd probably hear a lot more about it. But this is, and the reason that we're not hearing about it is because the Biden administration is cultivating this atmosphere, this fascistic atmosphere, by claiming that all of these people are trying to kill others, when in fact, whether you're vaccinated or not, you pretty much transmit the virus at the same rate, as Jen Psaki shows, as John Bon Jovi shows, and as Alexander Mayorkas, the DHS secretary who had to recently cancel a trip because he had symptomatic COVID, shows. They're going to argue, well, because I was vaccinated, it could have been much worse. But these are generally healthy people. So who's to say? But it is a personal choice that good for them. But don't go demagoguing and using the bully pulpit of the presidency to demonize an entire swath of the population with a scientifically bogus argument. I mean, now look at the statistics. Look at who's in the hospital. First of all, NPR has an incredible report out this week showing that ICUs are full, but they're not full of people who have COVID. They are full of people with blood clots, people with untreated cancers, people who put off their treatments because they were put under lockdown-like restrictions for so long, and now they're finally flooding into the ICUs. There are other conclusions that could be drawn that I can't come to, but this story is being buried as well as the fact that many vaccinated people are showing up in the hospital now with symptomatic COVID cases. So it's not a pandemic of the unvaccinated anymore. Again, you can argue strongly that the vaccines prevent death and severe illness when you have the antibodies that they give you for that limited time, that antibody spike, but they don't prevent viral transmission. And once you acknowledge that, then it takes the legs out of the logic behind vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, and the entire restrictive policies that the Biden administration is imposing.
I just can't stress it enough to people. People who are close to me are just they're just willfully ignorant on the science. They're willfully ignorant. I sent somebody someone close to me. I sent someone that study that proved that you are a year-long study in the Lancet that proved you are just as likely to transmit the virus if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated to someone in your household. Just as likely. And their recommendation was that you should get vaccinated to protect yourself, not anyone else. So this idea that you got to be vaccinated to protect someone else is not based in science. Also, they're still operating under this fallacious idea, this fear-based idea that you can somehow keep yourself from getting the virus. You're going to get it. Every person I know is going to get the virus unless they die first. Every person you know, every person who works at this show or ever worked at this show is going to get the fucking virus. You're a child if you think your fucking hanky is going to keep you from getting the virus. It's not. You're getting it. Adults over 30 get the flu virus twice every decade. That's the statistics. This is going to become just like the flu. The vaccines, you don't hear vaccines stopping the flu, do you? You don't hear vaccines stopping the transmissions of flus. No. You get the vaccine for the flu because it helps you. So it's beyond frustrating and maddening. And beyond disappointing to see people who consider themselves critical thinkers look down their nose at religious fundamentalists who don't believe in evolution, yet somehow are so scared, such big pants shitters that they can't even accept the science. Not do they have an argument against it, they just can't accept it, and so they ignore it. I send people that Andy Slavitt tweet. They ignore it. I emailed that to someone just 3 days ago. I emailed that Andy Slavitt tweet telling that person, you're going to get COVID. They ignored it. They said, we should have more testing. I go, more testing for what? So you know when you got it? Because you're going to get it. It's not going to stop us from passing it around. You can't, if someone has it, you're going to get it. So that's all I have to say on it. Anything else you want to say on that, Matt? It's fucking frustrating beyond belief.
Well, it's difficult to vaccinate against an airborne respiratory virus. It's not a static virus like smallpox. I mean, these viruses were easier to vaccinate against. So that you always see this conflation among the kind of the branch COVIDians, the kind of cultists who believe that somehow this is just going to be stopped if the public just all does the right thing and just comes together and does the right thing, that it'll just disappear. It's that they conflate it with other diseases that are completely different in nature and demonstrate their own ignorance about just basic scientific principles. I mean, this can be transmitted between humans and animals.
Yes.
And so zoo animals are being vaccinated against COVID-19 right now.
Fucking crazy.
A substantial slice of the deer population has or has had COVID-19, as National Geographic reported. So if it can go back and forth between vertebrates, then how are you going to pursue a COVID zero approach? And you've watched country after country that pursued COVID zero, tormenting their population. I mean, the Australian suicide hotlines were lighting up throughout the past months as they were put under hard lockdowns in New South Wales, and people were being just tormented into submission, and they've given up on the zero COVID approach. Now they're sort of reopening and declaring that, once we get to 90% vaccination, then we're going to lock the door on the unvaccinated, not let them go into retail shopping centers and so on. But they've admitted that this COVID zero approach is implausible, and so they're moving to another kind of restriction, which is closer to the end game of the whole pandemic for the global predator class: digital vaccine passports, digital ID.
Digital ID.
Yeah, I mean, we could. But that's a separate issue.
That's a separate issue.
Their population is over 80% vaccinated, and they're now seeing huge caseloads and hospitalizations like they've never seen before. That doesn't mean the vaccines don't work in preventing hospitalizations for the period when you have antibodies, like that 3 to 6 month period. But what it means is people still get it. They still get cases. They're still symptomatic. And you're just going to have to live with it like we live with like 40 other respiratory viruses that come in seasonal waves. Florida was the state that has been the most demonized because of its Republican right-wing governor, Ron DeSantis, and the approach he was pursuing, where he was shirking new mandates, imposing more mask mandates. And it was like the headline on CNN and MSNBC every night this summer when the Delta wave hit Florida and hospitals and ICUs were filling up. Well, guess what? Florida's gone 10 weeks with declining cases. It has one of the lowest caseloads in the country with no new mandates imposed by DeSantis. So we have to ask, why is Singaporean President DeSantis doing this to Singapore? Wow. I mean, it doesn't make, and the whole media is just ignoring the fact that what happened in Florida was a seasonal wave came and then it went. And the population, by the way, it's not like they're not taking vaccines. Florida has a higher vaccination rate than many other states. But this is just what's going to keep happening. There will be waves, and people can take measures to protect themselves against it. But in the cost-benefit analysis, firing tons of workers, locking people down and destroying their livelihoods, and tormenting people with all of these chaotic, failed restrictions, it just hasn't worked.
I want to let you know, on November 6th, we're going to be in Baltimore. November 11th, we're in Tempe, Arizona. November 12th, we're doing Los Angeles and Studio City. November 19th, Los Angeles and Studio City. And then Thanksgiving weekend in Portland, Oregon. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all those tickets.